There's a couple of aldermen that aren't on the committee, but why don't you come in and filter in seats? I'll allow that since this is a working group, okay? Now, this case you haven't been involved in the working group, they are extremely informal. We are not taking any minutes per se. Any vote that is taken does not count. That would need to be brought up in front of the whole committee. This is very much more in information. Let me take a pop shot when needed. But this has been a lot of work by a lot of people who sat on their hands. And a few of us really done the diligence with this and come out with this particular product. It's multifaceted. We're going to be discussing several different things. It's just not overnight parking. Okay, so you wonder why it took so long? I always say there's nothing wrong with putting some gravy on the mashed potatoes and dig right in there. So that's what we're going to do. Director Cummings.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I could briefly brief the committee on my goals and what I'm hoping to accomplish tonight.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, as you alluded to a second ago, this is a working group meeting. Some of you may not have participated in this type of forum previously. It's something we do from time to time that, as the chairman iterated, is a little bit more informal, with the thought process of trying to develop a piece of public policy that we can use in the future for official action. And it's something we do from time to time to develop consensus on various pieces of public policy that is of interest to the community. Happens a lot in the land use boards. It has happened at the Board of Aldermen level with myself and Director Marchant from time to time. And so I asked for this meeting, if you all recall, back in December, when Colonial Drive explicitly came up relative to overnight parking, and I thought it would behoove us all to get together and have a conversation about how the city wants to handle overnight parking in general. This meeting is being televised. This meeting is being recorded. It is not being actively televised. We are keeping minutes for just background purposes to be compliant with 91A, but there would be no official actions taken other than trying to, at the end of the day, the deliverable being, try to write down a piece of legislation that would hopefully meet the needs of this committee and gain their support, and then ultimately to the full Board of Aldermen, and so on and so forth. So, Mr. Chairman, my thought process on how tonight should unfold is to have an explicit conversation about overnight parking. We have Andy Hill with us from Desmond. He drafted the original technical memo that we did back in June of 2021. I believe he's updated it with a one-pager. What I'd like to do, Mr. Chairman, is refresh everyone's memory, go over what the 10 components of a successful on-street parking permit program looks like, then more explicitly drill down onto page 14 of the technical memo, which hopefully you all received, where we'll outline some of the sentiments that were expressed back in 2021. Stop there, open it up for public comment. Mm-hmm. Anyone who wishes to participate via public comment to let their sentiments be known, have that be part of the record, and then open it up to a dialogue and conversation about the thoughts of overnight parking.
Yeah. Thank you, Director Cummings. I think it has been a couple of miles in between, Mr. Hill, since the last time that you were here.
Yes, sir.
So can you give us a brief synopsis of what brought you from that point to here, and some of the things we have looked at, brief description of your company, community served, and everything else. So basically, it's your chance to stand upon a company's reputation and stuff like that. We do have one new alderman that's with us and new members to the committee. So this is sort of like will be their first actual meeting. So without further ado, I would like to welcome Mr. Hill. Yes.
Before we get started, I want to interrupt them later, but just a point of clarification. It was said that this would be recording. We need to be like swooping into the mics, or is this an informal recording? Is it going to be posted later?
If you could reach over and share a mic
Okay.
We should share
with your
the-
people, yeah.
Be a shame if there was a recording and no one could hear me.
Yeah.
And Chairman O'Brien, you should take attendance as well.
Yeah.
When
Okay, you want to be my temporary clerk? Okay, I'll recognize without any objection, temporarily, Alderman Clee will be the clerk. And of course, when we start with the regular meeting, we're going to need to appoint a real clerk. Not saying that you're not a real one, but, you know.
I'll just take attendance based on the people that are
That's-
that are
yeah.
here. I'll just call everybody's name out rather than trying to call the infrastructure, because
Right,
I'd have to look it up to find out who all the members are. Did
okay.
you want me to do that, or?
Uh,
'Cause I can look it up quick.
Yeah, I have the sheet of who's actually supposed to be here, so
Okay.
you could take the attendance from that.
These aren't all the members, are they?
Yeah,
Okay.
infrastructure,
Okay, thank
yeah.
you. I'll do that.
Okay, and it's open up to other aldermen.
Okay.
Mr. Hill and anybody else that's going to appear before us, please identify yourself, because where this is going to be recorded, like I say, no real per se minutes, but we're complying with 91A. Make sure that we know who you are. Although we have a crystal ball reader downstairs, a lovely lady that transcribes these meetings, but you wanted to get your name correct, so, you know, I think hopefully by now you might be all set.
I think so.
There you go, okay, all right. All right, without further ado, Mr. Hill, welcome, thank you.
Thank you.
Attendance.
Well, the attendance, go ahead. Clerk, please call the attendance.
Alderman Thibodeau,
Here.
Alderman Sullivan,
Here.
Alderman Clee is here, Alderman Richard Dowd, not here, and Alderman at Large Mike O'Brien,
Yes, Lieutenant.
here. You have 4 members in attendance.
Also in attendance is Alderman Jettie.
Alderman
and
Jettie and Tom.
Lopez.
Okay.
Okay. Is that the formal? Did we do it okay? All right. Now, Mr. Hill, thank you, sir.
For the record, my name is Andrew Hill. I'm Director of Consulting Services for Desmond Design Management. Desmond Design Management is a professional architecture and engineering consulting firm. We specialize in parking and transportation. We just celebrated our 50th year in business. We have served communities all around the country here. I'm currently engaged right now by the city of Portsmouth. I've worked in Concord before, Hanover, Keene, Bar Harbor, Maine, Burlington, Vermont. It's a very long CV here, but I've done a lot of community work and work on public parking systems. I was engaged initially when we were awarded the contract for a larger study, which was completed last fall and will be discussed and vetted later this evening in another session. We were supposed to get going on that in March of 2020, and we had a small event that derailed that for some time. However, at that time, there was also a growing concern about the state of overnight parking, and so under a separate contract here, we engaged in a study of overnight parking policies and best practices. You've all been provided the memorandum. If you've had a chance to read through it, there was a significant community involvement component to that, where we met, in some cases, multiple times with representatives from different wards to talk about their particular needs and concerns, thoughts, and ideas. We also did a fairly exhaustive assessment of programs that were in comparable communities. And the end product in that, which is in the memorandum, was the initial bones and ideas for an expanded overnight parking program to be put in place here in Nashua. That is, that program that was put into that memorandum is what we like to call in my industry a piñata, because it was based on best practices and best ideas, which means best within the industry, not necessarily best by the judgment of the people of the city of Nashua. And ultimately, these programs have to fit and have to work with them. So we wanted to provide a structure for decision makers to look at, discuss, debate, and then pull from that those things which were most helpful and most applicable to the city, and adopt or adjust, or in some cases throw out completely those things that would be non-starters. My understanding today is really to workshop that document and then talk in broader terms. This would be probably the 10th or 12th time in some sort of different session I've been involved in a conversation with Guy in regards to overnight parking, and so I thought for this evening it would be great to step back and you have something very structured and very detailed to react to. As you're looking at that and as you're thinking about what's going to work in your community, I just wanted to put 10 components that we've seen in other communities wherever we've gone and we've seen on-street parking permit programs that work, these are things that are in place in every one of those programs. And that's a memorandum that I've put in front of you. I'm just going to go top of the waves on this through the 10 points. But number one, programs only work if there's a clearly defined purpose and set of objectives. Often these set of objectives include some sort of measure of performance that defines success. And the reason it's so important to have defined purpose is because very often the formulation of policy comes out of that purpose. For example, the city of Quincy is going through a massive process of redeveloping their entire downtown. Directly abutting that downtown is a large sprawl of single-family homes and residential neighborhoods. When they were establishing their initial on-street program, they were very clear that the purpose of that on-street program was to prevent the abuse of curbside parking in those residential neighborhoods from the commercial district where people were seeking to avoid either length of stay requirements or avoid paying meters here. Once you have that kind of clear statement, it helps you sort of form all of the other rules and regulations. It's also critically important that the public has the ability to participate. These programs only work when the public has had a chance to participate in the design process, and equally important, in the pilot process, where you've been able to define how you're going to execute a pilot, how you're going to judge whether the pilot is successful, and you've gone back and reported at a later date whether it was successful or not. The programs that fail typically fail because they don't do all of those important steps in the process here. The other one that's very important for Nashua is really balancing parking supply and demand, and we talked a lot about the challenges that are associated with that, especially here in Nashua, where you have very dense residential development and a lot of folks that want curbside parking and a very limited amount of area that can actually be valid curbside parking. There are communities that turn a blind eye to this and just say, we're going to put a bunch of hunting licenses out and let folks find their way as they may. I believe Alderman O'Brien grew up in one of these communities, and he could tell you the merits and the liabilities of that kind of approach. The number one thing I will tell you from that kind of approach is you typically only see these in urban centers where either you have private property owners that are willing to step into the fray and create a safety valve when folks can't find a curbside space, or you have transit service into the area, and so this idea of providing far more permits than there are spaces is really motivated to some degree by creating an incentive for folks when they can't find those curbside spaces to look at alter modes of transportation. I don't think we have any of those safety nets here, so my recommendation is make sure that as you're issuing permits, you're balancing supply and demand. All of these programs have a qualifying criteria for participation so that you're not just giving permits away willy-nilly to everybody in the world, that you have an ability to identify who is a qualified participant and equally important, have the ability to assure equitable access for all participants here without any abuses. It is very important that whatever registration process you go through, there is an incentive to keep that information up to date, because you're going to have times we're going to need to move vehicles, snow emergencies, reconstruction of a roadway, something along those lines, and the ability to be able to identify either who should be parking there, or if somebody is not parking there, to start the process of identifying that owner so that they can move or relocate that vehicle expeditiously is critical to making these programs work. The other thing to keep in mind as you're rolling this out to the general public is these programs have to exist within your existing regulatory structure. So it's great if you want to make an area residential parking only from 9 o'clock at night until 9 a.m. the next morning. But if there's commercial uses in there and you've already instituted meters or 2-hour time limits to protect them as well, that permit should never give those permit holders a waiver against those regulations. You're trying to balance that use and make sure that it's a fair amount of access for all users who are sharing the space. Very often, folks will come up with a great program focused on really accommodating the residents of businesses or something like that, and sometimes turn a blind eye to the fact that residents will occasionally like to have visitors. Businesses will occasionally want contractors to be able to come in. It's just important as you think through any changes to your program that there's some sort of mechanism in place to allow those folks to come in and service that as well without opening you up to abuses. The biggest challenge that we often see when these programs are being designed or established is there's usually a element within the general public that says, not only do I want on-street parking, but I want the space right in front of my house, and I don't want anybody else to park in that. I am not going to bore you with the number of counter arguments I've had to develop this, but if you come up against them, I'm happy to show you the analysis that shows that in point of fact, your property taxes do not cover the cost of the establishment and the maintenance of that space, and if they had to, you may be looking at as much as doubling what your current property tax bill is. That in point of fact, on-street parking is an asset that should be available to all members of the general public, all the constituency within a particular area, and as such, you cannot reserve one space in front of your house unless you have some sort of defined special needs, such as a disability, which is recognized universally. And that finally, allowing somebody to park in the space in front of your house does not, in point of fact, according to FBI, raise the likelihood that you are going to be subject to a personal or property crime in the future, and that's an argument I've heard as well. Last thing is that these programs, when you design them, have to be set up with contingency plans. There are going to be times, invariably, when people are not going to be able to park in these curbside spaces, even though they hold a permit. Again, whether it's for snow removal, whether it's periodic closures for street cleaning, for waste pickup, for road resurfacing, something along those lines. And before we put the program in place, if you spend some time thinking about how you communicate those interruptions out to folks and where you can direct them to park during those interruptions, that tends to make these execution of these programs go much smoother. So that's my 10 points, at a very high level, and at this point, I will cede the floor.
Yeah, want to hold questions until,
I just had to clarify.
sure.
Thank you. I just want to clarify something about number 9 that you mentioned.
Yeah.
You said that a space could be given if someone had a need, but that's not true in the state of New Hampshire, I don't believe. That we can put a handicap spot there, but that doesn't guarantee that you get to use that.
Exactly.
It's just a
correct.
handicap spot can be put there, but if another person with a handicap permit, they can park there. So I just wanted to clarify for the public that it doesn't guarantee that homeowner or that resident that spot.
Absolutely.
That's all I wanted to clarify.
Yes.
And word of caution, I'll take you down to the exact street in Everett, where the whole street is handicap parking. Is that what you want? So, you got to follow what is the guidelines, like in the parking lot, how many are you allowed within a certain area?
So, Mr. Chairman, if we could.
Yeah, let's continue on.
Now would be a good time to pivot to the technical memo that you all should have received in your packet. And specifically, I'd like you to go to page 14, where it talks about some of the ideas, recommendations, some of the thoughts for actually potentially implementing an overnight parking program. And so I will turn it over to Andy to have him walk through in very high level the various paragraphs starting on page 14, but Desmond believed back in June of 2021 that there was an appetite for some wards and neighborhoods for a change into the overnight parking policy, but not enough to support a wholesale dismantling of the current policy in place. As such, we do not recommend simply abolishing the current prohibition of overnight parking across the city, but you could look at potentially implementing a hybrid solution.
Yeah.
So,
Director Cummings, not to interrupt you, but thankfully I see members of the NFR are here. But did the invitation go out to MPD?
they did, and when the time comes, I plan on explaining and expressing.
Could you, just to make sure it's, I do not want to, I want this to be as much as
I spoke to Chief Rourke about 30 minutes ago.
outstanding. Thank you, Director Cummings.
Andy?
So again, I will speak to each heading and the thoughts behind the recommendations that are in there. I'm not going to go through and read this whole thing verbatim to you. My voice is not that good. So we talked a little bit when we were talking about best practices about making sure that you have both contingency plans in place and that you structured the program to recognize that there are other uses or other impingements that may happen from time to time in a particular zone. That really speaks to this question of core rules. The rules that are included in the document are rules that were developed either from existing regulations that are in place right now, or they were recommended rules that were developed after discussion both with residents of the wards, with their aldermen and their representatives, as well as representatives of DPW, the fire department, the police department. So in that case, those 5 core rules have foundation in those conversations. They're not developed out of whimsy. We talked a little bit about the importance of involving the public. This particular program in concept really is driven by the public constituency all the way through the design process. When we talk about application for consideration, the reason that we structured this in such a way so that the initial application comes through consensus building within the community and it actually is brought to the Board of Aldermen as a initiative that was developed in the community was to make sure that any particular zone or neighborhood had general consensus that they wanted to go down this road, that this was not a zone that was being imposed on them and you either participate or don't participate as you will, but rather an area that already had political will and a collective buy-in to start looking at establishing these zones if they don't exist already. Capacity testing, we talked about the balance of supply and demand. We spent a lot of time looking at what the impacts would be on curbside capacity, particularly how wide a road you need to have. Based on how wide a road you can have, How many, can you park on one side, can you park on both sides? Does it all have to be parallel? Can it be angled? What do you need as far as a safe travel lane in order to accommodate not only standard traffic, but also emergency traffic, fire department vehicles, et cetera? That was all something that was considered here. As a matter of fact, I think we were provided at one point with turning templates for the fire department so that we could figure out what the minimum setback was from different intersections in order for them to be able to make that turn in an emergency. We looked at setbacks from curb cuts and cross streets and alleys and that type of thing. And basically what this all comes down to is being able to define within a given area, if you're thinking about implementing a permit zone, how many spaces are actually there. It's not unusual to go into a neighborhood or an area and have folks say, we're really looking forward to this, we really want this. And they're very gung-ho on it right up until they realize that in a 6-block area, if you're lucky, you can get 100 spaces. And there are 300 residential units within that entire area. Again, this type of capacity testing at the outset of the design phase is really there to help identify the limitations of the program here to make sure that there's still a general consensus of interest. The other important thing is really, again, to be able to have a clear idea of what you can offer, because very often that may end up defining or changing the rules of the program. And a prime example is there is a neighborhood in Richmond, Virginia, not far from the Virginia Commonwealth University called the Fan. Very dense, older, pre-colonial neighborhood here. And the residents initially were looking to institute a resident-only parking permit program in that area because they had VCU students who were coming over and actually parking in their neighborhood. Interestingly, law of unintended consequences here. Once that program got up and started to take off, the city was not super diligent about balancing the number of permits versus the number of spaces that were available within that area. They very quickly found out that two things. One, curbside parking in the area before they put in this RPP had been running around 80 to 90% occupied. Once they put the RPP in, it was 100% across the entire area. Even though the VCU students were out, there were more cars coming in to park curbside in the area. The second unintended consequence was there were more cars coming to park into the area because now that residents knew they could park both their cars at the curb, they were taking the small garages that they had been using for vehicle storage and they were turning them into offices, hobby rooms, that type of thing. So again, having that conversation early on helps to set expectations and also helps to avoid some of these potential unintended consequences. If there is still a measure of interest once capacity testing is done, then you really need to get an understanding as you're establishing an area for how many folks really want or need this and the basis for their want or their need. Again, this helps with rule setting. Everybody, when they hear we're talking about giving permits away, will stick their hand up and say, sign me up for 5. When you start couching it along the lines of, we're going to open up for curbside permits, but we'll make the first one $50 a year, and the next one's $100 a year, and the next one's $150 a year, all of a sudden, you see a lot of people kind of put down their hands because now there's a cost associated with it. And you need to go through that due diligence process to figure out how you're going to, if people are agreeable that there's a limited amount of capacity and they all agree, we'll deal with that. Now you need to figure out how many people are really interested in the program, and then that will define how you administer those permits out. And you may still come into a situation where you have far more people within a particular zone that are interested in participating in the program than you have spaces. That's usually an indicator then that you've got to look at designing some sort of lottery system. So once a year, everybody who's interested puts their names in, and you pick out the first 100, and those are the folks that get the permit that year. It's not sexy, but it is equitable and fair as far as that goes. Once you've gone through that, then one of the mechanisms is looking at, like I said, doing a lottery system. Another mechanism is looking at rate setting. Rate setting can be something that you use, like I said, to avoid abuses. But rate setting is also important because, especially when you're implementing a program into a new area, there are going to be significant costs in administrating that, marking the spaces, putting the signs in, sending out extra enforcement if that's what's necessary in order to make sure that people are abiding by the rules of that. I can tell you right now, your $10 per year permit rate is definitely not covering the cost of programs like that. When I've done calculations before, what I have found is when you take all of the linear mileage that has parking on it within a municipality, and then you look at what you spent for upkeep, road maintenance, snow removal, things of that ilk, you can typically divide that down to a per square foot basis. If you multiply that number by, call it 20 feet by 7 feet, which is your typical curbside space, so if you multiply that number by 140 square feet, typically you're going to find that it costs something in the neighborhood of $200 to $250 a year to just provide for that space and provide the services for that space here. That's also why I tell folks when they come in and say my taxes are paying for that, run the numbers and then add in land costs and development costs, your taxes are not paying for that space right there. They're probably paying for 3 or 4 square feet in that space right there, and if you've got a bicycle, you may be able to park it there. Sorry, I digress. But again, this is part of the due diligence process to make sure that there is, that the rates for the permits are set in such a way so that it's a revenue neutral program that is fiscally supportable for administration and care by municipal government going forward. And then from there, I go into processes for how you could conceivably conduct hearings on an application for recognition, an initial pilot for moving forward with something like this, periodic checks back from time to time to actually demonstrate that this program does work and that there's a general consensus of satisfaction with the people who are participating in the program or living in the neighborhood. And then finally, there are also some recommended procedures that you could put in place to periodically bring those programs back in front of the Board of Aldermen from time to time, just to confirm that everyth's still working and that those zones or those programs that are put in place should be kept in place, so that it doesn't become an issue where you've thrown something in place and now it's impossible to undo it if the neighborhood changes at some point in the future. You have people move in or move out, the new people that come in don't like the program, they want to see it repealed. Now you have an automatic mechanism in place to do a review of that on a regular basis and determine whether it should be upheld or repealed. I think that's generally the sum total of what the memorandum encapsulates.
Yes, thank you, Andy.
Did you want to open it up to some questions?
And also want to make sure we get public testimony from the various members of either city personnel or the members of the public who came out this evening.
Well, I think that it's timely, seeing that we have a division director and Chief Buxton that is here. And Chief, are you or your designee willing to speak And we're not going to hold your feet to the fire. This is like an overview on some of the things. So are you prepared to speak on it, or you want a few minutes to think about it? You're still digesting? Okay, very good. We also have Public Works here.
Yeah, yes, and if Public Works is ready to address this, I could also just make clear for the record that in speaking with Chief Rourke at about 5 o'clock this evening, if there are follow-on meetings on this topic, someone from the police will absolutely be there. He asked that I express a sentiment that he wants to work with this group, whatever the pleasure of the Board of Aldermen is. They will certainly work with us to try to achieve whatever goal that is set.
Looking forward to that participation from our friends in MPD, and that would be good. So now I'll call Public Works. Are you prepared? And again, could you just reintroduce yourself with your name for the transcribing, please?
Absolutely. Matt LeBlanc, Operations Manager for Public Works. Just wanted to thank you guys for including us tonight in this working group. And I think one of our biggest concerns, I mean, Andy, thank you for this, kind of clears some stuff up, but a lot of our concerns, I think, starts with our trash collection. We feel that in doing the overnight parking, it's going to really impede our collections. Our automated trash trucks can do approximately 900 to 1,000 stops per day on average. The program was rolled out back in 2003. Back then, we had 25 CEOs, or collection equipment operators, if you will. We're down to 14 current day, so we are operating a lot tighter, more efficiently. And if we go with the overnight parking, we're going to have to take a few steps backwards, I feel. And, we're going to need more employees, more trucks. That all comes with extra cost. Our workman's comp claims have gone way down over the years. When you start putting 2 people per truck compared to just the one that operates just the automated truck with the sidearm, we've come so far that we've actually started talking about going automated recycling. I know we're still ways away from that, but we are working towards that. Winter operations, again, Andy, thank you. I saw on page 14 here, you spoke about, was it enforcement or not parking during snow emergencies? I mean, last night was a perfect example. I mean, we called a snow emergency, and we spent a large portion of our day today chasing either emails, complaints, or, you can only tow or ticket or get so many vehicles moved off the street. And, so far we're 3 for 3 on snowstorms this year. It's just, we were chasing complaints, and we were going back to streets 2, 3, 4 times. So, even during the summertime, might be insignificant, but, our street sweepers, we send between 2 to 4 out per day. We start early mornings to try to beat the traffic to avoid any issues, but just a lot of what we do in Public Works, this could affect what we do day to day, night to night.
And so, Mr. Chairman, to put a more finer point on what was just raised, and this is one of the reasons why we want to make this conversation explicit, if the overnight parking was to proceed on a certain street and trash collection could not occur, then the question is are residents going to drive their trash to the landfill? I don't know, but that's the real consequence of some of the conversation that you're talking about tonight that you all need to be aware of, or be willing to spend a lot more money than what we previously have been spending. All governing's about trade-offs, and so what you need to know is the trade-offs to the various decisions that you're making. If you decide to pursue with this overnight parking program, a certain street may not get cleared, or may not get cleared as fast.
And that could cause some problems from an emergency management perspective. And so we need to be aware of some of those conditions before you proceed with any type of decision. I just wanted to further hit home those points. Director Photo couldn't be here this evening. She was unwell today, but she wanted to make sure I conveyed the sentiments of DPW along with Matt.
And I hope Director Photo feels better. Send her the best wishes of this committee. She has been an asset, and my compliments to your squad. You did a fine job with another snowstorm, so thank you very much. Questions to DPW from the board? Alderman Clee.
Thank you. I absolutely agree with you with trash collection, but we do have overnight parking on Lock Street in various areas through the French Hill. And when I first became an alderman, first thing I did was Director Photo and I took a walk down Lock Street. And I said to her, I wish we had taken it on a Thursday that was a recycle day, because the sidewalks are unbearable. I know we have the grant, and I've heard that good things are happening and moving forward on our Lock Street initiative, so I'm very happy about that. But we already have this issue on Lock Street, Whitney Street, May, all of those streets within the French Hill and so on. Are you not able to do the automated trash pickup?
So, in speaking about French Hill in particular, part of it is, but a majority of it is not. It's been a number of years, admittedly, since I've done trash collection. I was a foreman for 10 years doing it, but I believe from Lock Street up is automated, but I'd say probably about 70% of French Hill is not automated. It's all done by rear load packer. And again, that is 2 or 3 people per truck. And realistically, if it was automated, we could do most of our Thursday collection that is semi-automated with 1 truck, but because of the way it's set up, it takes 2 to 2.5 trucks, depending on the time of year.
Thank you. And the reason why that I had taken Director Photo for a walk down, that was because of the sidewalks, but also in general, there are a lot of multi-units on Lock Street. So you have 3, 4, 5 trash and recycle bins sometimes at any one go. And Mr. Chairman, may I ask Mr. Desmond just a quick question about...
Quick question, yes.
Yeah. Mr. Desmond, on page 15, when you were talking about the measuring contiguous uninterrupted curb space and so on E, you said that there shall be no parking within 3 feet of a curb cut for any private driveway or alleyway.
Yes.
The law is also that you can't park from across a driveway, correct? And would that not be part of your criteria? The reason I ask that is Ms. Stansfield knows that within my area, we have a lot of these,
Yes.
like even something like Summer Street, where it looks like, oh, there's lots of parking, but because the way the driveways are, you have very few parking spaces because of this. So would that not be one of the criteria? I believe it is in RSA or ordinance.
That is in our current ordinance.
So you cannot park behind someone's driveway because it impedes them, and that's one of the issues, as Ms. Stansfield knows, that people are pulling out. So I just want to make sure that that becomes part of the note.
In Boston, we call that the suicide spot.
Right.
You're guaranteed to get clipped.
And that's exactly what happens within my, so I just want to make sure that that becomes part of this
Yeah.
working document, and it's a working document. But
Thank you, Alderman Clee. But I also want to stipulate, too, there was an attempt years ago to try to address this particular issue with parking. What we're going to come up with something is a plan. If it is accepted by this particular board, do not be surprised that some of that previous work that was done in error. It won't meet today's standards, because this is a comprehensive study that went through. So we're going to have to decide on that, okay? So I don't want to waste a lot of time. I want to build the new idea of the future, and then we'll deal with the past tense. But it's got to be different. Director Cummings, you have something to opine on that?
Well, I just want to put a more finer point on what you're referencing, which is for those of you who are newer to this conversation, there was never any type of technical study done when we first implemented overnight parking here in the city in this regard or to this level of detail. And so it was done through happenstance as necessary. with input by the various departments in the city. And so some of the streets that are technically having quote-unquote overnight parking right now through what was our quote-unquote pilot program that, as Alderman O'Brien referenced, done quite a few years back, those street dimensions wouldn't necessarily qualify for the street dimensions as articulated by Andy Hill, our consultant with Desmond here this evening. And so there will be a policy discussion at some point and a decision necessary as to whether we want to revisit that or maybe just grandfather those and look to implement some new standard in the future. But, you know, when you're thinking about making equitable decisions for all involved, it's definitely a variable that you're going to need to keep in the back of your mind as you're the policymakers.
Okay, one more quick question,
I
Alderman, please.
promise.
Very briefly.
I promise it will be. Again, in the section that I was just talking about in 3, you talk about parking within so many feet of a stop line and so on. Again, in French Hill, we have a number of streets where it's not the 25 feet, they're very specifically 15 feet or 10 feet. So it's just more of a commentary that if we did implement something like this, do we have to redo all the ordinances for that so that, and then re-implement it? Because we will lose a lot of parking spaces if that's the case. Just want to put that out on the table. I'm not asking anybody to do that, but it's something, food for thought.
So dimensionally speaking, all of the recommendations that we made, again, were based on looking at the minimum widths that you needed to have in order to support safe vehicle traffic, either one-way or two-way, responses from emergency vehicles, passage of DPW vehicles going through. So keeping that in mind, as you measure some of these areas and you were to look at those standards today, if those become the governing standards, you're absolutely right. You're going to lose some capacity.
Or just grandfather those, and then just say moving forward, we're going to use a new standard.
Yeah,
That is a
I just
policy
wanted to-
question that needs to be addressed.
Trust.
I just wanted to put that out on the table,
Yeah.
that does exist. So
Well,
thank
we're
you.
going to have a lot on the table, so you're not going to miss a bite. Any questions directed to BPW, who the gentleman is particularly standing there? So, there you go. Oh, okay,
We,
thank you.
questions for him?
Thank you. So this is Alderman Jettie speaking. So Mr. LeBlanc, I understand your and your department's concerns, but when I hear what you've got to say, I mean, I hear you're concerned about trash collection, but trash collection occurs one day a week, and it's during the day, not during the night. So when I hear you talk about it, I think you're imposing it. It sounds to me like you're imposing problems related to trash pickup that I don't doubt exist, but I don't see how they're related to the issue of overnight parking. And I want to point out in Desmond's report, of the, I don't know how many cities they looked at, there's only one, West Hartford, that prohibits overnight parking. All the others allow overnight parking, including Manchester, New Hampshire, Concord, New Hampshire, Portsmouth, New Hampshire. All of these cities have found some way of allowing overnight parking and yet picking up their trash. So if the program was designed to, for example, I don't know, for example, overnight parking would be permitted but prohibited on trash days from 7 or 6 a.m. until 3 or 4 or 5 p.m. Wouldn't that solve your trash pickup problem? I mean, picking up trash, doesn't occur, like between midnight and 6 a.m. usually. And the other issues you talk about similarly, with with street sweeping. I think you've told me in the past that sometimes street sweeping does occur in the early mornings, and, so, couldn't we, allow overnight parking, in accordance with the example that Desmond has recommended, but have designated street sweeping times when it would be prohibited. It just sounds to me like the problems that you're bringing up, could be dealt with, and as I said, other cities seem to have been able to solve this problem.
Is there a question in there?
Don't you agree?
Thank you.
You just asked the lawyer.
You may disagree. If you-
On paper, maybe, but no, logistically, no. I could throw a ton of things out there. We are extremely short-staffed in every single department. Just last week, we borrowed 7 people from our street department to go pick trash. We had people from our wastewater plant plowing last night. So I think in a perfect world, if we sent 4 street sweepers out Monday through Friday, sure. But it's just not the reality of what we do here in Public Works. It's always a moving target. So we change things every single day the way that we operate. And, I think listening to what you were saying, if I were to speak about our snow plowing, you can't predict what day, what night, what morning it's going to snow. I could bring you to the inner city routes right now and show you where the overnight parking exists, and we're lucky to get a pickup truck down there. There were streets last night that were actually impassable that we had no tow trucks. There not enough police to actually assist with. Last night could have been a little bit smoother, but when it comes to trash collection, we work 13, 14-hour days at times. So, I don't know, in a perfect world, maybe, but in what we do here, current day, no.
And then, Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Yes, you may.
To follow on to what Alderman Jettie was just talking about, again, just to bring some reality to the situation. Yes, I think a lot of those communities do have overnight parking, that's clear. But what you may not be aware of, or where you may not know is, and using street sweeping as an example, if a street was going to be swept and there is a vehicle on the road, you will be towed. And that's a hard stop. And so what we have here in Nashua is we tend to be a little bit friendlier, a little bit more amicable. And so what you need to be prepared for is the phone calls of cars getting towed regularly because streets are being swept. And so then therefore, you need to just be aware of that trade-off of that decision, is that more cars will be towed so we can proceed with our operations as necessary. And there's a cost to that. And so, and you just need to be prepared for that, for that cost, and understand what the consequences are of the decision that's made. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. All set, Alderman Jettie? You don't have to jump in if you don't
No,
want to.
I wasn't going to, but now that you've invited me.
No, I didn't invite you.
Are you done?
I did, I did want to say that, generally speaking.
No opining, questions.
The fact that, we have a housing crisis, and we're trying to provide more housing, and one of the ways of providing more housing is doing away with the parking requirement that somebody that builds an apartment building has to provide parking. And so as the planning department is moving in that direction, as we may be moving in that direction as far as zoning, we have to find some way of allowing people to park on the street. There are so many other cities in the United States that allow overnight parking. We are maybe not unique, but strange in that idea. So, as a long-range plan, we have to figure out how to deal with this problem. I know that ideally, I think, the Department of Public Works would like the streets to be completely free of cars at night so that they can do their very necessary work, without any kind of impediment. But I just don't know how we can do that and deal with this other situation. And when I look around, and all these other cities are living with it, whether it's, you can park on one side of the street on odd number days, so the street sweepers can sweep on the even side, and vice versa and stuff. They've figured out ways of dealing with this. And I would hate for us to, reach the conclusion that we can't do it because there's some problem. I think these problems are, are solvable. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, because I was really searching for a question somewhere in the conversation. Director Cummings.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, and I have to get on my soapbox for a second relative to the zoning and the land use code. So one of the reasons we're in the situation that we're in is because in our downtown area, we don't have parking requirements, and yet we have a conflicting public policy that doesn't allow for quote-unquote overnight parking, and we do want to encourage more housing. But we need to make sure we have a long-term plan in place that handles parking when you're developing residential housing. And we need to make sure we have that in place before we proceed and do anything. And I've brought these concerns up to the various land use boards and bodies and department, and Director Sullivan knows this well because he and I've had a lot of conversations about it. But variances being approved, creating 2, 3, 4 families on lots that can't accommodate the parking, and then they're expected to park on street, and some of these people don't even know that they're not allowed to park on street, creates a problem for us. So as a community, we need to create a long-term plan. Representative Plumondon actually had a solution a few decades ago, which I thought was very creative, in creating community satellite parking lots. Now that only works when the private entity doesn't realize it's the municipality buying this parking, because they drive the land prices up. And so if we are able to do it through a straw or through some third party that could keep the land costs down, that might be a long-term strategic solution that provides, so we have a way to provide more housing and the parking necessary. But just saying that we need more housing as a reason for creating, for a reason for moving forward and then creating this problem, all we're doing is moving problems from one side of the ledger to the other. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Director Cummings. Alderman Lopez.
Sorry for making you stand that long. I just wanted to know whether DPW has the ability to track repeat offenders who are not moving their cars, and whether there is the ability from your department to communicate like a revocation of a parking permit. And then finally, if that were the case, is that communicated to residents who participate so they know, like, don't mess around or you lose your parking?
I honestly couldn't answer you. I know we create a list, like for instance for snow plowing, like when we do snow tows, we do create a list and it gets inputted, but
On DPW side, but not necessarily parking?
I think your question's misguided to BPW, and I'll allow you to sit. Thank you. I think it's parking. Your question's going to be more focused, because anything, they're going to maintain the streets, but parking's going to enforce the law.
My thought was if they're the ones directly, I mean.
No, don't think this is, Jill, would you like to give a presentation of what parking would be? And then.
I don't know if I have a presentation ready.
No, just keep it brief, please, yeah.
So Jill Stansfield, parking manager. So currently the system for during snow emergencies, a list is created by one of the departments in Public Works. They hand that off to the police department, who works directly with the tow companies. Our office isn't currently involved in that process. Could we get together on that? Absolutely. Do I need more staff to do anything like that? Absolutely. Right now, it's me. So resources, yes, but until we have more resources, it's,
And to throw it out there, this is part and parcel of what this committee is going to do. Don't be surprised in the future, Alderman Lopez, that the question that you have presented will be brought up in that particular format, I think, through PPW. If they're maintaining the streets, then who's going to enforce it? And as it turns right now, since the police have moved on the the parking enforcement, it will come down to parking on it. So that's the direction.
If I could just point out briefly.
Yes, you may. Go ahead.
It's probably more cost-effective to provide an administrative response than to keep applying a towing. And so that was my point. If we're creating this system, is we should make sure that people are encouraged as participants to not get towed and not to have those things, because there would be additional consequences too. So that maybe we can replace some of the people who are habitual, offenders, I guess, with alternatives.
Mr. Chairman, I would love to hear from Fire if they were ready.
Are they ready? Okay.
Steve Buxton, National Fire. This is Adam Pouliot. He's the Assistant Fire Chief. And this is going to be one of his lanes of travel as the new Assistant Fire Chief. I'd like to thank you guys for inviting us to the work group. We're more than willing to participate and support the effort and provide you with any information that you need to help you make the most informed decision possible and create policy that's effective throughout the city. One thing that I'm hearing as we're talking through this is, we're talking about a lot of issues that have to do with the city growing, and we're starting to encounter some real, what I would call true city problems, housing, where we parking these cars, so on and so forth. Unlike DPW, police, snow emergencies, stuff like that, when we are experiencing an event, it's a significant emergency in the moment. We do not have the option to tow vehicles, so when Adam gives you some technical data on some of the things that we're looking for, there's a reason for that. Our largest vehicle, Ladder 2, what we refer to as the wingspan on it, when the outriggers are put out, is 19 feet 4 inches. So that's for us to be able to deploy the aerial device appropriately to a building. We have a lot of 2, 3, 4, and they're going higher, where we would need to deploy devices like that. Alderman O'Brien knows we have plenty of hose within the city, and we can stretch them from the end of the street if we need to, but it's very important that we're able to get those aerial devices to the front of the building. And we have some very talented drivers and operators within our organization. And at the end of the day, when you look at some of these bigger cities that allow parking on their streets, and if you probably go to their risk department and have discussions with them, there's a lot of damage done by fire apparatus, moving vehicles with the fire apparatus. That's just kind of the course of actions when business needs to take place like that. So that's kind of my 2 cents at this point in time. If you have any technical questions or whatever, Adam can certainly weigh in further.
Yes, Alderman Sullivan.
Thank you. Chief Buxton, I have a little column going here, pros, cons, overnight parking. Would you characterize what you just said as a hard no, or kind of a softer, we recommend not doing this?
I don't like to give hard no's, I guess is the best answer. I think it's doable if policy is developed that allows it to take place appropriately. Turning radiuses, we have overlays that we can supply and have supplied to them. It's all well and good to sit here and draw up a plan and all the cars are parked appropriately when you look at that plan on paper. I could take you for a ride right now and show you places where people consistently park outside of the legal spot that make our apparatus negotiating that corner very challenging under the best of conditions. So some of our parameters that we put out there might seem a little bit aggressive and lead you to believe that we're a hard no, but that might not be the case. The case might be the rules need to be pretty strict and they need to be enforced so that we can gain access.
Okay.
Does that answer your question? Or?
It does. So I think I would characterize it as if it's kind of an if-then situation. If you move forward with it, then we would recommend this list of criteria to incorporate into the policy.
Yeah, move forward with caution is
Sure.
probably the best way.
Got
That
it?
sounds right, yeah.
Okay, all right. Put you right
Hey,
there.
Alderman Jettie?
Yeah, the problems that you point out with, parking, cars parked and making it difficult for your equipment to get to a certain location, isn't that true during the day as much as during the night? So if parking is allowed during the day, that causes a problem for your equipment, and it doesn't change at night, does it?
Yes, it does, because people are less responsive. So oftentimes we pull into a neighborhood and we have a working incident. Just the noise that firemen make when they arrive, and they will make additional noise, tends to rouse people, and they will come out and move their vehicles as quick as possible. Not likely to get that response at nighttime. By the time they get out of bed, they recognize there's an event taking place, the block's shut down. And once the block's shut down, you're not getting anything out, you're not getting anything in. So that would be the difference.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Question for the fire department? Yes, Alderman Thibodeau.
Were the sizes of our vehicles in the city given to Desmond so they know the size of the ladder truck, the stanchions, all that data was given?
And that was what informed some of the recommended dimensions when you look at roadway widths, et cetera, to say this dimension will support parking on one side or the other side. This is a minimum dimension you've got to have in order to consider doing parking in a particular area.
And to clarify, that data was provided back in 2020.
Yeah.
I know there's some vehicle purchases, so we should probably refresh that, but, to assume that the assumptions are still appropriate.
Yeah. I can say this, that there's such a term in the business called short jacking. But when you get into short jacking and not putting out the wings, as the chief has referred to, you're taking a lot of risk.
Yeah.
The thing is, the truck is engineeringly designed to be as safe as possible. Plus, it may not operate because there's safety overrides to it. So you just took the taxpayer's almost $1 million vehicle and made it useless out in the street because of parking, if it's in the wrong type of environment. So you have to keep that in mind. So that's it. Further questions to the fire department? Because we do have something from the public. No, I'll recognize Representative Plumondon.
Thank you. Representative Mark Lamondon, District 3, Ward 4, former 6-term Alderman of Ward 4, and former 10-year Chairman of Infrastructure. I have, throughout my tenure, and I will dare say the prior Chairman of Infrastructure, Bob Dion, rest his soul, we were all opposed to overnight parking because we looked at it as a can of worms. I will say, since I read this study, I can see some flexibility, and I commend you to that. To address, if I might, a couple points that were mentioned by Alderman in questions. One thing regarding Nashua Fire and the difference between daytime and nighttime. I've personally been to several fires at night. They're laying on the air horns, no one comes out. I've been to 3 or 4 fires that way, and I've seen them run the hoses over the vehicle and through the vehicles. Because in an emergency situation like that, seconds count. And I've seen it with AMR ambulance too. Some of the houses in the city, the front door is right up on the sidewalk, and there's a car parked there. They can't get a gurney out. So in situations like that where seconds count, it's important to keep some of those things in mind. Regarding the towing, by state law, the towing can only be done by a uniformed police officer. So traffic enforcement, parking enforcement doesn't have the authority to tow. They need a police officer there in order to do that towing. Regarding comments of some of the communities that are in this presentation and saying that they have successfully do this, I would counter that and say talk to them personally. While I was chairman of infrastructure, I spoke to multiple communities where they said to me, if you have an overnight ban, keep it, because it's a nightmare. Like Manchester Chief I spoke to, and the on and off, on and left side of the street, right side of the street, people get confused, and it's difficult to administer. That's going to be one of my questions when I start going through this a little bit, is the administration and that we're prepared for it. I just want to, I'll go through this as succinctly as possible. Page 14 is where it lists the recommendations for the city of Nashua. Again, I want to point out, and the study points out, that we're looking at the inner city, high-density residential properties. What is also not brought out in this is that Nashua is unique compared to these other communities. We're a border community. So we have a lot of traffic coming up from our southern border that are taking parking spots and stuff overnight, parties, so on and so forth. It's not a unique issue, but it's something that kind of sets Nashua aside from some of these other cities that we're looking at. Article 2 on page 14, it talks about doing annual updates. I would request quarterly. Being such a urban compact neighborhood, it's very, very transient. You'll have someone in an apartment building for 3-6 months, then they move. So then the question of administration is, how do you manage, did this person move to another area of Nashua? Are they using the same parking permit on a different street? Or can they hand off the permit to the new resident or the landlord? There's some questions I have as far as the administration of it, because it's extremely transient. I would also recommend, if we go forward with this, that parking stalls be painted. Right now, no offense, but we have minimal parking enforcement as far as state RSAs. The 20 feet to curb. Hydrants are another thing, but that if parking enforcement goes by, that's an obvious. But they're not out there measuring, 3 feet from the entrance of a driveway or things like that. So if we have painted stalls, they know where the legal parking stall is, and that can be utilized accordingly. I would also suggest that in areas of the city where we have daytime parking restrictions, we should consider not allowing them for overnight parking, because if there's a daytime restriction, it's usually there for a reason, like maybe super high congested areas, and that's why it's like, say, a 2-hour parking except for weekends. So we've got to look at the NROs and specific areas and take that into consideration. If there's a daytime limitation, are we going to allow nighttime, or is it going to be worse? I'd also make a suggestion that in the inner city, some legislation that I put through for allowing in the municipal parking lots and the city garages, maybe we should look at, say, not allowed within 500 feet of a municipal parking area. All right, and to try to keep those inner city streets, which are extremely narrow, and let those residents use those municipal lots that we have. Other considerations is on-street vehicles, repair. They're not supposed to be doing it, but they do it. So something like this, you'll see vehicles. When I got all the calls that you guys are getting now, and ladies, I would always say, okay, look out your front window, tell me how many cars are on blocks. And they'll say none, but yet you call Lowell, Lawrence, East Hartford, you keep going on the list, and you'll see that. So that needs to be addressed as well as selling vehicles. I've seen that personally. They get old cars, they fix them up, and next thing you know, you have 2-3 cars on the street with for sale signs on them, running a business. So that's a problem. And I'm going to try to hurry here. Regarding public works, the trash is one thing, but I'm more concerned with the street sweeping. Where I live, and I'll give you that in a moment, in the last 10 years, Where I've seen the street sweeper come down the street with the brushes down, it's been twice. They come down the street, they don't put the brushes down because it's all cars. So what I would advocate is a scheduled time frame where the street sweepers come down. So typically it's the after trash pickup. You could even do it every 2 weeks when we do recycle. But it's something that residents can become accustomed to and hopefully keep the cars off the road so that we can clean the streets. And that opens up the issue for catch basins being clogged and so on and so forth. I don't have to go into more detail there. I would also advocate that one permit per unit be issued. There's talk about visitors and so on and so forth, and that's fine. You have a visitor, park in my driveway, and I'll park in the street. I've got the permit. We, by state law, cannot legislate how many vehicles a person owns. So, having said that, you've got to, it's a numbers game. The recertification by the Citizen Council for 5 years, because of the transient nature of these neighborhoods, I think that's far too excessive, and it should be at minimally annually, should that path be chosen to go by. So that takes care of page 14. And then I was going to go to page 5. I got notes everywhere. I just got this, so I'm almost done. So I thank you for your time.
Because Representative, I want to give the committee members, we're meeting at 7, and I want them to have like a little bit of a break. So if you could indulge me,
3 minutes.
Representative, I would appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
The idea of allowing for holidays, I think that's a great idea for an experimental, to try this out and make it publicly that, we'll try it out. The Christmas time or whatever will allow overnight parking. We can do data collection. So that could be beneficial. And then I'll go right to some examples. Where I live, right over here on Elm Street, there's 24 units. And there are 10 off-street parking spots. There are 9 legal parking stalls. So we've got a delta, a missing of 5 stalls, even if we allow this program in my specific area. One of the units had 4 vehicles. They're down to 3 now. 4 units have 2, and they're rather signal. You touched on handicap parking, so that's another thing that needs more discussion. And I'll end with, 10 years ago, we identified the need of Nashua needing another parking garage east of Main Street. Nothing's been done. I had worked with Southern New Hampshire. We did a land swap, and the plan was to build the parking garage, was Kinsley Street Extension, now it's Medical Center Way. They were going to build a multi-unit garage there with a catwalk, with a new ER, new heliport. Since Elliott took over, those plans were down the road, went down the drain. But that need for another parking garage east of Main Street still exists, and I dare say with our growth, we could use an additional parking garage west of Main Street. The numbers are growing. And again, we can't legislate how many vehicles people own, so we've got to play that numbers game. I thank you for your time. I'll let you get back to your meeting.
Okay. Thank you, Representative. All right. I think we took, the intention here was to take a very small bite out of the pie. We're not going to solve anything this evening. So that opens up the door to where would we like to go as a committee? Have another session such as this, an informal meeting where we could do some preps. Mr. Hill, you have a thought?
I just wanted to make a comment before we got too far away from it here. One of the things that I'm hearing from all of the testimony we've heard this evening is there are concerns both about enforcement and about the ability to remove and relocate vehicles. And those were identified as key issues in the larger study, and there is a whole series of recommendations for strengthening and improving that. I'm not saying it will address all your problems, but I wanted to let you know there are recommendations in the larger study that's to be vetted later this evening, that speak to addressing those issues as a systematic issue, not just specific to overnight parking.
So, Mr. Chairman,
Yeah.
Where do we go from here? Is there an appetite for an overnight parking permit program citywide? And depending on how you answer that question, would, tell us the next steps after and how we want to proceed. And depending on what the commentary is, I would recommend another meeting such as one like this in a week or two.
My appetite is this, and see if other members of the board would agree. I think it's about time that we start polling indirectly with other members of the board to find out what the appetite is citywide for something like this. Ward 9, we don't have a problem. I could very easily go against it. Although I understand the needs of Ward 3 and Ward 4, and I'm not going to vote negatively to that. So therefore, I'm willing to string this fish on the line for a little bit longer to get the information out there so people can weigh the balance appropriately and then make a decision. So if that encompasses another informational type of meeting such as this, I think we got a lot done. If I was a little curt in trying to keep everybody's nose to the stone, it's almost 6:30 and we're meeting at 7. That's why. There is a candy machine downstairs for those that might want a little bit, something to eat. But anyways, we've got to start with the next meeting at 7. So I'll look for a solicit. Alderman Clee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Personally, I do want this conversation to continue. I will speak as the alderman from Ward 3. I have a very unique situation in that I have French Hill, and then I have other locations where overnight parking would not be a problem. I also have certain residents who want overnight parking to not have to do permit or anything like that, simply because they don't want to have to move the multi-vehicles they have within their driveway, even though they would fit within their driveway. So these are concerns and these are conversations that I would want to have. You talked about equitable and so on, and I don't know if it would be even legal to say, you got a 4-car parking, with a 2-bedroom home, your home will not be granted an overnight parking. I don't know whether or not that's illegal, I don't know, but I would like to have that conversation. Also within French Hill, if we go with many of the recommendations that are here, and while I do think this is a great guidance, I'm concerned about Cross Street, where I think where Cross and Canal are, I think it's a 15-foot from that corner that's allowed to have parking and so on. French Hill has a hard enough time with it as it is with parking if we adhere to this. So I know a conversation was had to about grandfathering. So before we actually went in and said we wouldn't, I really do want to have more conversation, and I'm sure that Alderman Lopez is also looking to increase his parking, not decrease the parking. And this is my concern if we just did a blanket. And I can tell you personally that I hear from both sides of that story. Some people who do not want overnight parking on their street. Some who say, I live at the end of a dead end, I could put 3 cars down there. And I say to them, yep, then so can your neighbors. So just to let you know, that cannot be designated to just you. So I think we do need to, I think originally it was talked about a area by area, maybe 3 or 4 streets, we would do that. So again, I do want to.
So that's the second part of this,
Right.
Alderwoman Clee. So if there's an appetite, and then the question would be, is it to follow some of the recommendations as outlined by Mr. Hill? And yes, Andy very clearly, wrote out a prescription as to how we could look to pursue this. One of them would be is the community itself would develop the district where the on-street overnight parking would be allowed. Trade-off to this process is it's rather bureaucratic, Some people would say there's too much process here. That's for you all to decide. But what he has provided you is the best practices that have been proven out throughout the country for communities who have come before us on this.
Okay, by a show of hands, because this is a very informal vote, those who would like the committee to continue, members of the committee, those who want to vote affirmatively for the committee to continue, please raise your hand. Opposed? Okay, we shall continue. Okay. Anybody else would benefit for the meeting upcoming? Director Cummings, before you speak, can I put you in charge of booking the next working group? And please pay attention to your emails. We'll try to get everybody out there on the list and continue forward with this. Director Cummings, you are recognized.
So to take that first item, what I would suggest is we typically meet on, I believe, Wednesday nights. The fourth Wednesdays of the month is our standard meeting. We alternate in between finance committee meetings. There's a finance committee meeting on the 7th. The 14th is Valentine's Day. That would be the next time we could meet on a Wednesday evening, though I would understand if folks are otherwise occupied that evening. The next time would be the 28th of February at its regularly scheduled time. We could do it at 5 o'clock. So I guess the question to the group would be, are folks available on the 14th for a 5 p.m. meeting, or do you want to pass on that?
How's the 5 o'clock working out for everybody?
I can do it.
You can do it?
I can do it.
All right, let's do it. 5 o'clock on the 28th?
14th?
14.
That's
Valentine's
Valentine's.
That's the question. So that's the question, or 5 o'clock on the 28th.
I would prefer
28.
28th,
to 28th.
okay.
Let the sweethearts alone, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I don't need a divorce lawyer, thanks.
We will look towards 5 p.m. on the 28th for the next time we get this group together. Between now and then, would it be appropriate, and I would seek the committee's guidance on this, for us to start developing a framework using the Desmond recommendations and the
Oh, absolutely. That gives us the steel skeleton to start to build with. Everybody in agreement? Yeah. Alderman Cleve.
Just a quick question, and I don't mind looking at this, but I did bring up some of the areas that do not meet this criteria. I'd like to have a list of those, whether I do it myself or someone, because French Hill is not the only one that would fall within that area. Probably majority of it is Ward 4 and Ward 3, but so like Cross Street and Crossing Canal is one of them. I think it's 15 feet.
As we start to develop, so think of this as a real wide approach, and we will start to narrow in. As we start to narrow in, we'll start to take the concerns that you're raising more explicit to Nashua. This is really just developing a framework as to what type of public policy we're acceptable with. And I haven't heard consensus from the group yet that using the Desmond model is a good jumping off point, which we could tweak from there. Is that something that?
I would, if I can speak for the group, and please, if you don't, I want to follow the Desmond. We did pay for this, but a lot of money for this particular. It's well put together, Mr. Hill, so I think.
So specifically on the Desmond, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
So explicitly on the overnight, it's a citywide approach to overnight on-street parking with a permit process. And we would be looking to develop a system where it would be, for lack of a better way of describing it, and just to kind of keep it quick, self-governing, and where it would be grassroots. So it would come from the bottom up to us. It would be vetted internally by the city departments and to you at the Board of Aldermen, or recommendation, and then there would be, a vetting process like that. That is essentially what this program outlines. This is what we would start to craft for a piece of public policy, and I just want to make sure we're going in the right direction.
Question?
I have to ask, isn't our next meeting to discuss to adopt this as our guidance, or am I mistaken?
No.
Oh, not for the overnight, that's for the other program, okay.
Yeah, no. No. But what I would like to do is have a deliverable for you to review, look at, mark up, discuss. And then from there, we'll get further direction as we narrow it in, and then depending on how long this takes, ultimately towards a piece of legislation.
Thank you. Alderman Sullivan.
Thank you. I know at 7 o'clock, we're going to talk about the big, kind of the main piece there. 300 some odd pages.
Yes, sir.
War and Peace of parking studies.
Call me Dostoevsky.
Yeah, so and this committee is specific to overnight parking legislation. It was my impression, I did read through the study yesterday and I skimmed it. It seemed to me that there were a lot of things that we needed to do before we got to the overnight parking. Correct me if I'm wrong, but one thing that really stood out to me was the enforcement piece, where you outlined that Nashua has one person for every 1,100 and change versus other municipalities that have one for every 600. Then there was talk of an enterprise fund, there was talk of automatic arms and things, and there was a list, it might have gone on for 5 pages, of various tweaks that we needed to make to our own city charter and codes specific to parking, that we needed to do that. And then you could consider an overnight parking. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Can I clarify?
Yeah, please.
Not everything in that study is an if-then type situation. So we could do some, not all.
Okay.
But the big thing, and you hit upon it, there are some things that do need to occur to be successful in implementing an overnight parking program. Resources, making sure that Jill and her team are resourced appropriately. Case in point, doing this Desmond model could take a staffer in and of themselves to implement, and she does not have that staff right now, right? So that's just a very explicit example. And so if we want to follow this model, well, we're going to have a gap in our system because, is it a full FTE? No. Could it be 0.5 an FTE? Yeah, definitely, to get it up and running. But there's 0 FTEs right now. And so we're going to need to accommodate that if this is something that, the community wants to pursue. So there are multiple examples like that in the study that would help drive this overnight parking program.
Okay. Looking for a motion to adjourn because it's 6:37. I want to give people enough time to go get a cup of coffee.
I'll make that motion.
Make the motion. Alderman Cleese made a motion to adjourn. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Appreciate it.